Hi, I wanted to start this video by saying I hate philosophy. Philosophy, to me, is overcomplicated, lots of big words that hurt my brain, and making mountains out of molehills. I think philosophy, functionally, is recreational. Like art, except with thought. I guess I shouldn't say I hate it. I take that back. I don't hate philosophy. I just think that it can become a dangerous distraction to a simplistic faith. And I don't mean simplistic as necessarily simple or easy, because perhaps in someone's practice of their faith they would find challenges, but simple in the way that it's straightforward. And I feel like philosophy, philosophical ideas can be very interesting, but their utility wanes. It's one thing to have an ideology, but a lot of time the implementation of that ideology is lost in the translation of actually living life. But where was I going with that? Free will. Free will, I feel like, is a topic that's like talked about so much. How many philosophers have talked about free will? How many theologians? So I wanted to give my 2 cents on the topic of free will, what it means, what I think it doesn't mean, and stuff like that. The thing is, if we assume by our faith that there is an all-powerful being that we call God, I refer to God as Allah, but it doesn't matter how you refer to God or gods. If we assume that this divine power is omnipotent, omniscient, all-powerful, pervasive universally, then there's no room for free will. Why? Because free will is an absolute term. Free will, okay, it's like the truth. Something is either true or it is not. There's nothing really partially true. There is, in the sense that there can be truth in it, but anything short of that absolute is less than the absolute, by definition, obviously. So a lie, for example, a falsehood, can have truth in it, but the rest of it is surrounded in fiction. I don't personally believe, when it comes to truth, that we can fully grasp the ultimate truth of everything to begin with. So in essence, to put it in a way, everything is an illusion, because everything is short of the truth, God's truth. What I would call God is truth. But that's something that we constantly aspire toward. But like truth, freedom is kind of an absolute term. If you say that there's free will within the confines of a certain limitation, then it's not really free. It's kind of free, but it's not free. Something's either free or it isn't. Something is either independent or it's dependent. You could argue there are degrees of it, but at the end of the day, something's either free or it's not. That's how I kind of view free will. And I know this problem has been reiterated, regurgitated over centuries. I'm sure there's tons of viewpoints and opinions on this thing, and that's kind of why I wanted to just throw in my 2 cents about it. Because it's an important thing when it comes to faith. It's a thing that has a high sensitivity level when it comes to faith. Because the idea is, I don't know how many times I've heard theologians or pastors or religious leaders of any kind, they will talk about how the problem of evil arises. How can there be, and it inevitably comes in this form, how can there be an all-powerful God who can do anything? And also, there's evil in the world. There's natural disasters, pandemics, there's abuses of all kinds. How can there be these evils and an all-powerful, supposedly all-loving God at the same time? My answer is that there cannot be. God is either all-powerful or there is no God. And what I'm talking about is the highest God, so to speak. Not a partially powerful God. Because if you think about free will, and that's always the answer that's given by these religious teachers or leaders. They always say, well, at the end of the day, God gives us free will. First of all, they're making a leap, in my opinion. They're making a jump there, assuming that God gives us free will, whatever that means. That's the reason there's evil. I can't explain, or they can't touch on the natural disaster part or whatever, but as far as human interaction, evil upon evil, people doing horrible things to other people, well, this is because of our free will. Okay, how much do we really control in life? Do we control when we were born? Under which circumstances? By who? Do we control the ways that our cells regenerate in our body? Do we control how much our heart will beat? Do we even control the weather? Do we control anything? I mean, how little do we actually exert ourselves upon that causes real, lasting, enduring change? And how much is our conditioning upon us? Oh, sorry, battery. I don't control how long this phone lasts. Sure, I can make manipulations, I can charge it, I can plug it into the wall, for example. But suppose the battery in it just decides to die one day. Suppose I just drop dead right now. It's possible. There's this planet we live on that's just spinning around the sun at a pretty fast rate. I can't control. Before me, millions of other living beings have lived and come and gone. After me, millions more. What really are we where's the free will part come in? What my point is in saying is that God is all-powerful in my conviction. God being all-powerful leaves no room for any kind of free will. Is everything predetermined then? Is it a sort of fatalism where it's like, this is fate, this is destiny, and it's unchangeable? You know what? Yes. In the end, whatever happens was God's will, because God's is really the only will that there is. And I assume that in faith, that God's will is the only will that there really is. You can't both say that God's will is all-powerful, yet we have free will, because by implication that means that my will is at least equal to the will of God. That means that things that I choose in my life can actually change destiny, can change things that I am in control of. Whereas I am a mere instrument, and in my belief, everything in creation is a mere instrument of the will of an all-powerful God. Yes, and this is the troubling part that sometimes comes up, or I've heard before, in terms of like the reaction to fatalism or determinism. So you're saying that these evil things that happen in the world are God's will too? That genocide and natural disasters and just these horrific things are part of God's will? How I would answer that is this: everything is God's will, because if it were not, it would not be. Anything outside of God's will is not. Everything that manifests must be God's will. Not speaking of obviously evil things. God works in mysterious ways. Well, I mean, that's an unsatisfactory and almost insulting response, in my opinion. And I would never respond to real evil that happens in that way, that God works in mysterious ways. But honestly, who are we to say that God is not also the Lord of evil, if God is the Lord of everything, evil included? It's an acceptance that God's will is behind everything. That includes evil things. But it includes all good things too. The point isn't for us to delineate good from evil, but to serve God, to serve this thing that we call God that supersedes this order. That's really our point. That's really our purpose, is to align ourselves as much as possible, as we believe as we can, with the will of God, which we assume to be good ultimately, but which is inhibited, and those inhibitions are where evil comes from. I don't believe that God's will is evil, ultimately. But the way that that good will is figured over generations, over eons, the way that it is figured is beyond my personal awareness. Something, in other words, something that might seem bad to me in this place now, in my time, might in the end turn out to be good, or turn out to have created something that was good. But never mind that anyway, because it's all speculative. All we can have is the conviction of our faith in our heart, here and now. And in response to that also, I would say, like to predeterminism, we have to remember also that to God there is no time. There's no past, present, future. To the order of God, which is the divine order, everything is now. Everything has already happened, because everything in the divine order of God's will is what's going to happen. So things being inevitable, being God's will, already have happened. For example, I'm already dead. I just don't know it yet, because death is inevitable. Death is an inevitable passing of life. So in a sense, I'm already dead. I'm already old. These things already have happened in the sight of God, from, you could say, God's perspective. So does God know what the future is gonna, what's gonna happen in the future. There is no future for God because it's all one thing. That's what omnipotence is. That's what omniscience is. Or what I think that's what I would call it. Like, as far as the like technical meaning behind those big words, omnipotent, omniscient, whatever, but you know what I mean. All powerful, almighty. That's what I mean by it. We, we rather fortunately don't have as much control as we think we do. And it's fortunate that God's will is good. Evidently, it's good because here I am, and here life is. When it really chances being the way that they are, and the way the universe and the way that everything operates, and how hostile environments can be. I mean, have you watch one Discovery Channel show about the cosmos, how hostile, how violent nature really is. Yet here is life. Because that is the unfurling of God's will gradually. So it must be good. Time is just the unfurling of God's eventual goodwill. So how I would respond to the problem of evil in summary, I would just say, God is responsible for all things because God is the only power there is. There was an experiment done. Forgive me because I can't remember the context or what the experiment was called, but basically they took babies, human babies and small children, and they sat them at a table. And these scientists and doctors would put a barrier between themselves and the child so that it was kind of like a game of peekaboo. So when the experimenter would hide behind the obstacle, the child would react like it didn't know that they had hidden, and then it'd be like peekaboo. It's like it's the common child game of peekaboo. The thing that they found through the research of doing this experiment was that babies and small children can't conceptualize yet that when something is hidden, it's still there, it's just hidden. Like, we know that I don't disappear when I hide my face, for example. I'm not gone. It's just that this is in front of me, but the child is is undeveloped, so it sees something that's in its own perspective. It cannot see in its perspective anymore, must be disappeared, because what else would be outside of their own perspective? In a way, that's how I see the notion of free will. Yes, we have free will. It's not, it's an illusion. We have free will in as much as my pet dog has free will within the gates of my backyard. It's not really free, but if it makes you feel better, it's free. Because if we deny this essential element of faith, if we deny that, then we deny the object of our reverence, who is God, ultimate power. And all the uncomfortability, the discomfort that may cause. We can just know in the assurance that God's will is ultimate, and that is what will be fulfilled. And God's will is good, evidently so, because here is life, and life is good, and life persists. But for now, all these things which seem to be not good, which aren't, that are objectively horrible that happen, these are mere missteps in a long journey. that's going to be around for quite some time before the will of God is fully fulfilled. So that's my take on free will. We have free will, but our concern ought to first be that we conduct ourselves in the manner in which we know God's will to be. Because we're inevitably going to fall short in some way. We can't know the fullness of God's will, obviously. But the point of religion is to try to follow that and manifest that in our own, to hop on that train that's heading in that direction. God's train. To hop on that train to the best of our ability, hoping that we're saved.